Hi, this is Antminer Repair, and tonight we're going to talk about soldering on heat sinks to the 17 series boards, T17, S17, S17 Pro, and S17 Plus. Been getting lots of questions in Discord about how to get a heat sink back on an S17 board. People are looking for thermal paste, they're looking for all sorts of stuff. But these heat sinks are soldered on. I haven't found any paste, any adhesive that really works well for heat sinks because they get very hot, then they fall off, then they burn the board, plus they make a mess of your board. So I'm going to show you tonight how to solder on a heat sink, talk to you about different types of chips, what their condition are, and what you can do to get the heat sink on. And I'm also going to show you soldering a heat sink on a T17, so two different things. Talk about the temperatures and all that great stuff. So if you like this content, please subscribe. If you see that bell over there, you can hit that bell and it'll notify you when I produce a new video. And also, we have 1,250 people in our Discord channel that are actively talking about repairing Antminers. And what's nice about Discord, you can post pictures, ask questions. People can post pictures too. We're trying to build parts lists, all sorts of great stuff for repairing it. So join us there. All right, so let's get started. This is an S17 Pro board. I bought it as a parts board. It was burned in this corner down here. I fixed this. That's another video or two. That's on my channel on how to fix the pads that got burned. This board still needs some more work. It's missing two chips here, so I'm going to do that on a different video probably. But tonight I have this heat sink off an S17. And I'm going to put it on the board. It looks like this one is this size, so we're going to put it on this board here. But first I want to talk to you about, some of the conditions the chips are in, because you use a little bit different technique to kind of on how the chip is. So I'm going to zoom in the microscope and we'll take a look at these chips, because there's a representation of different chips on here. So hang on. Okay. So this is the chip that I repaired earlier that had a burned pad. Looks pretty good. You can tell where I've repaired the leads and put some solder resist on there so it's blocking it so it won't short. But put this guy on. This is a brand new chip, and probably don't need to repeat this too much, but if you're into replacing chips and putting brand new chips on, this chip has no solder. And yes, that does say AMR for Antminer Repair. That's just kind of a joke, and somebody found that on Discord. I was wondering if somebody would say, hey, is that really that? They did. So anyway, the trick is you need to get this kind of like this with solder on it. And I tried various techniques in the beginning when I started replacing chips. I would put a little drop of solder paste right here, and then when I would heat up the heat sink and drop it on there, the solder paste would spread all over the chip really well, but it would also splat over into the legs of the chip, and it wasn't melted all the way, so it caused a real problem with lots of solder balls shorting stuff out. So I had to be really careful, and it was sketchy how you would do it. By the way, if you experienced guys are saying, hey, this chip's not straight, it isn't for a reason. The way I had to do this, it actually had to go in at a slant. It went perfect. It actually seated itself exactly how I needed it to, but yeah, it is crooked a little bit. So for this, what I do is I'll turn over the solder. I'll turn over the. Let me see if I can get this in here. I'll actually turn over the heat sink, and this heat sink's dirty. It needs cleaned up, and I'll throw some solder paste right here. And then what I'll do is upside down. I'll heat this sink with heat gun. Let me switch cameras. So what I'll do usually is take a big heat sink, set this guy on top, and then take a heat gun and just heat it underneath and melt the solder on there. So then I have a pretty good coating of solder on here. I'll let it cool. Then after that, I'll put a very small, let me see, I'm a little bit off the video. That heat sink's in the way, maybe? Let's see it right here. I'll put a small touch of just very little bit of flux. I'll just drop a little bit on here, and then I'll heat this heat sink up the normal way, and I'll drop it on. I won't drop it on, I'll place it on, and it'll be good. That way I don't get any spillage. You don't want to put too much solder on this heat sink though. It has to be you know, just a little bit of amount, just a film on there that you know is going to cover there and do that. Okay, so that's with a new chip. Let's check out some other conditions of chips here. So we have another type of chip here. Let me get it focused. This chip has been run hot. You can tell it has no copper top. In fact, it's burned off the adhesive. I think there's an adhesive, I'm thinking, that holds the copper on here. This is actually probably just copper plated. Here the plating is gone, the adhesive is gone. This is actually stainless steel. You won't get solder to stick on this at all. I mean, maybe a piece of it or two, but the solder balls will just roll off this. So your only hope of putting a heat sink on this is to really clean this surface out and wipe up all the, it's actually adhesive and burn stuff on here. You can actually see I can clean it up by scraping it. And then actually I can, somebody's calling me on Discord. Let me shut that off. That always happens when I'm making videos. Alright, there we go. Sorry about that. Discord channel is busy. So, alright, so I made a whole video on the technique to get heat sinks on here, and even with all that work, sometimes a heat sink will just not stay on. The danger of not getting a heat sink on during runtime is if the heat sink falls off, the chip gets hot, shorts out, burns up your whole board. So be careful. At some point, if I can't get the heat sink to stick, I'll just replace the chip with a new one and get the heat sink to stick, or a used chip that's been proven to be good. Some of these, you know, this one looks really bad, but if you go over to this one, it's pretty worn, but look at all the copper. So all I have to do is get all this etching. You can see where I've kind of worked on it, but get all the black stuff off, use alcohol. And I throw a lot of alcohol in these and scrub them. This chip actually still has copper on it. I think this is just a film of solder. Maybe a little bit of it's lost. I'm going to be able to place a heat sink on this guy pretty good. So he's in good shape. Pretty good shape. Fair. That's going to be a hard one. That one's broken. Here's another case. Let's go to this case. So sometimes, because you're replacing a heat sink, your board's been dropped during shipping pretty hard and the heat sink rips it off. Depending on how much damage it is, this is actual silicone in the chip. So this heat sink was blown off of here because it got dropped and it ripped out part of the chip. This chip, most likely because of the amount of damage, needs to be replaced. If it's just a little hole like that, I wouldn't worry about it. Here's another one with the same. Wrong place. Here's another one with the same. Pretty good injury. What I'll do before I do this, I'll probably replace these. I might measure the resistances and see if it's good. But if you've got one like this, you're probably looking at a chip replacement. So probably stop there and find somebody to repair your board, or learn how to repair it yourself, which is the whole point of these videos. So anyway, so I wouldn't just throw one on here. If it's little pock marks, sometimes it's okay. The chip is still good. You could probably do it and the heat sink will be good. So then the third case I wanted to show you is the normal case when your board is in pretty good condition. You'll have a chip that looks like this. This is shorted out here. I have to clean this up, but as far as the top goes, it looks pretty good. Things are in good shape. So what you would do here is what the technique I'm going to show you next. I'm going to switch cameras, and basically you can either put a tiny drop of flux here or leave it without flux. This solder will melt. Just a word about solder. When you're working with a chip base, you're working with a type of solder that melts at 182 degrees. If you're ever going to apply solder to the top of the chip for a heat sink, you get a lower melting solder, so it's like 130 degrees, so that the chip heat sink solder melts before you unseat the chip. Now if you happen to have a heat sink that ripped out the chip and it's still stuck to the back of the heat sink, chances are your chip's probably still good. You can actually, like I heat and melt the solder on, take your heat sink aside, get the heat sink hot, and see if you can scrape that chip off, and then you can probably reuse it and put it back on if you know how to put chips on. Okay, so right now we're gonna, let me see, this guy right here, he has a pretty big mound of solder here. It kind of bothers me, but I'm not going to clean it off. But we're going to put a heat sink on this guy. It's like they'll probably put heat sinks on this guy. I haven't tested this guy, but I'll put heat sink on here and do that. So let's do that. I'll switch cameras. Let's do that. Okay. So what do you need to put on a heat sink? You need, if it's just like this and it fell off and you can repatch it because there's enough solder, you really just need a set of tweezers, a good set of tweezers. eBay, $10 for a whole set. You need a really good gun, a heat gun, that'll go up at least to 375 degrees centigrade. This is a whole rework station. You don't need that, but you can buy a solder station with a heat gun and a solder iron for about $50. And if you're running miners, you ought to have it, because it's nice to be able to take these off and look for solder balls and fix your boards and put the heat sink back on. So that's a pretty easy operation. So I'm going to use a heat gun. I'm going to use tweezers. I'm not going to use the flux tonight. I don't think it's necessary. So the way I do this is you want to make sure the bottom of this is clean. This one's not. So I just take like a knife and I clean it up. So there's no burning on it. The solder's kind of nice. Flux will clean it some. I might take some alcohol. Where's my swab? Might just drop a little alcohol and clean some of the residue off. So it's still pretty dark up there. It's just like welding. You want to have clean surfaces. You don't want to scrape hard or gouge, but so that's nice and shiny now. I'll dry out the alcohol. So this guy's ready to go on here. There's solder here. We'll do that. So the thing I do is I heat this soldering gun up to 375 centigrade. I have pretty high fan, so it heats up fast. I hold the top of this guy, the very, very edge. You see that? You gotta hold it tight. It's tiring. If I stab down in here, I'm like this. When I try to go put the chip on there, it won't come off, so that's no good. So you want to be able to just lightly set the chip on there. You get a practice hand. I still shake a lot. And once you set it on real easy, don't push. The solder will begin to melt and grab it, and you'll just be able to take it off and it'll settle in there. Okay? So let's do that. I'm going to turn on the heat gun. Let's get our heat sink here. My surface of the chip is pretty clean, so I'm going to go ahead and I just do a real slow count for this guy. And I count to about anywhere from 30 to 50, depending on the size of the heat sink. This guy's going to be a 35 or 40 probably. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40. And then sometimes I wait a little longer. Some people might say this is too much. I don't apply any pressure on the chip once I set this on there. You just let it cool by itself. You can blow on it. Alright, so let's set this guy down. We want to center it good. Make it nice and straight. I picked it up by accident, but it dropped just fine there, so it's going on. Sometimes if you don't feel like it's set right, take it back off and do it again. Inspect your things. Or you can apply more heat if you didn't get quite enough heat. This one did get heat, so I'll let this air gun cool off, and I can blow on this guy. Typically the bottoms of heat sinks are about the width of a chip, so you don't want this guy off, or the chip, you're not actually cooling the chip that much. So my guess is this guy's cool enough now. So these guys are stuck on there. Yeah, so he's on there. So good. That's how you do it. So anyway, I'm going to do a bigger one on a T17, and we'll conclude the short video for tonight. Let's take a look here. Alright, so this is a T17 board. I got a chip over here that I can solder. It looks like it has a little nub up on it. Probably has a little bit too much solder on it. Just going to try to trim that down a little bit if I can. Hopefully you don't spread solder over your board like I'm doing. I'm going to take this heat sink and I'm going to put it on here, right here. It's clean. I have solder both sides. I'm all good. So let's do that. These are a little bit heavier to hold. You just got to kind of practice. You know, if you mess up, you can always unmelt it and pick it up, but always check your work underneath to make sure you didn't spread solder somewhere you weren't supposed to. So let's get this guy going. This is probably a 45 or a 50. $20. $30. $40. Unless I counted wrong. Yeah, I can smell that dude's hot. Usually it would start smoking, but I think it's smoking right now. So a little bit after it smokes, you're probably good. It's the second I'm watching. Hopefully I didn't wait too long. Put this guy down. It'll stick. This guy didn't quite set down. Probably because I had it off for a while. Just going to apply a little more heat. You don't want to press down, but I can make them melt this way. Anyway, it's probably pretty good. Actually, it is good. It's just fooling my eyes. But what you don't want to do is cover the holes and the access ports for testing. And this one I probably did. No matter. I can pick them up and move it. I'm probably going to have to. I think I was working on that side of the board. I'm cooling it off just by blowing on it. Don't touch this with your fingers. It's hot. Okay. There they are. Okay. So that's how you put hot heat sinks on the 17 series boards. For L3s, for S9s, for some of the other boards, you have to use this black glue. Don't have a video on that one. I'm sure you can find one on the internet or on YouTube. The S19s, you'll use thermal paste and these big honking heat sinks that you bolt down, but these have to be soldered. Relatively easy once you get in practice, but it's kind of really scary the first few times you do it. But now second, I just do it. I don't even think about it anymore. So the important thing is don't put too much solder, don't put too much heat so it slops over to the edge of the chips and makes a mess. Okay? Then you have something else to clean up. Thank you for watching tonight. Please go check out the Discord and watch some of the other videos, and make sure you subscribe, please. Thank you very much.